Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Jordan Tardif. I'm a Canadian University student and I am also race bikes for fun. This channel will focus on online cycling content, particularly at the moment, focusing mainly on Zwift. That will expand into possibly other online platforms and outdoor riding once the weather is good enough to start riding outside again. It's been created in kind of a response to a lack of available good route recons. Zwift Insider has developed a really good template route recon that you can go through and read, but it doesn't really give you a lot of information in terms of being able to visualize where you are on the course, where different selection points that aren't the KOMs or sprint banners happen, things like that. So this video will go over those things, we'll show you the course, and we'll talk about a couple different strategies that you can use. I'll be releasing these as a series following the Zwift Racing League, just because that's where the most people are racing at the moment, so it'll hopefully be helpful to as many people as I can. Which means that each week I will be releasing one of these videos when there's a road race, and the weeks that I don't do a route recon will be for the team time trials, where I will have a kind of how to team time trial information recording that I will do and discuss, from beginning to end, like how to get your team organized and how to do a little bit of route recon on the course that will be done that week for team time trials specifically. But beyond that, it'll mostly be on different race strategies for team time trials and things like that. And with that, let's move into the course. So this is the UCI Road World Championship course in Richmond. It is an event-only course, so in order to access it, you need to start the regular course and then do the lead-in. Once you pass this start and finish line up here, you can U-turn, and that will put you on to doing the reverse course. This is where Peter Sagan won his first World Championship jersey, and Lizzie Armstead won her World Championship jersey. It does tend to be considered favorable to short power, punchy riders because of the layout, which can really be separated into three sectors. The first sector is pretty hilly and contains both categorized climbs. The second sector is the lower flats and has one uncategorized climb. The third sector holds the sprint points and is pan flat, basically straight through it. This leads to two major favored forms of attack for either long power or short power, where long power will attack on the descents and flats, or short power will attack on the climbs, or leading into the descents if they can get it up to speed. So 400 meters in, you've seen that we are now on this first descent, would be a good place for short power riders or heavier riders that are on the long power end to sprint up to speed going into this descent so that you can drop off some of the lighter riders. It's because of how Zwift has your weight affect your speed on descending. You can go to the Zwift Insider article about it, linked below, to see how exactly that's done. But basically, as a heavier rider, if you can get that lighter rider out of your draft before super tucking, you have a good chance of being able to actually drop the lighter rider on the descent, or at least making them work harder to stay in your draft. As you can see, it leads directly into the first KOM, just 200 meters after the end of that descent. So the KOM starts at 1.4 kilometers in, but stays pretty flat for the first 400 meters before turning uphill. Now, long power riders will want to keep the pressure on the pedals as soon as they finish that descent, so that they can move to the front and try to start sag climbing. So sag climbing, for those that don't know, is moving to the front of the field so that as the climb progresses and the faster climbers come up to pass you, you are moving back through the field but not being dropped by the field. As the riders make the turn at about halfway through this climb, That is where I would say short power riders can start putting out a lot of power and a lot of hurt on some of the more long power riders because the gradient increases, and as the gradient increases, the watts per kilo matter increasingly more than the absolute power. Now this climb does level off shortly before the end. I should be coming up here just about 150 meters-ish, 170 maybe, from the end. I wouldn't let up on this, particularly in points races. People will race to the banner, but even if you're not in a points race, the banner here, as you come through it, goes into a pretty steep descent. So by sprinting through that banner, you can come onto this descent already basically in super tuck range, and this descent is extremely short, but any recovery you can get will be helpful, especially because the next climb is just after this. Now, as that descent ends, I would say long power riders should start trying to put out more power again and get back towards the front so that they can repeat that sag climb effort. Short power riders, I would say, should wait until just before this turn to start putting out a lot of power and move more into the short power, because as you saw, it jumps up there to about 20% at its peak and stays above 12% for a pretty good time. So that high short power will pay dividends on separating yourself from the field here. And in either case, you can see it's leveling out to about 3% here. We're still 400 meters from the end of this when that happens. I would still say that you should stay on the power here, try to build whatever gap you've gotten from the field, or try to catch back onto the field through this flat point, especially because the field, in points races in particular, will not slow down as they get towards that KOM, and even in non-points races, people will tend to attack through the KOMs and sprint banners anyways. Now, as you come through the sprint banner, you can see you're right onto another descent, where you can get pretty easily up to the 58 kilometers per hour, negative 3% grade or greater, and get into the super tuck. This is a great place to get some recovery after those two hard efforts, and before this levels out and goes into what I'll call as the second sector. Short power riders by this point should have been trying to get a gap on the field, gaps beyond, preferably beyond 30 seconds. Gaps beyond a minute tend to be pretty definitive in Zwift. It's almost impossible to come back from beyond minute gaps. But if you are in between two groups and you know you're not making it up to that front group, it can be worth it to let up a little bit, go to the second group on the road and help them try to work together to bring back a front group, instead of just being stuck in no man's land between two groups. Now that hairpin turn there marks the beginning of the second sector of the course. This sector is quite flat with a couple rollers. We'll see the first one at about 5.7 kilometers in. It's about 100 meters in length, averages between 6 and 8%, I believe, and right after it is a short descent. Now the reason this is important is because you can use that as a launch point where you'll see people attack up the roller and hold that speed through the descent to give them a faster speed on the flat and start to get away and try to make a kind of last-ditch breakaway attempt before settling into the rest of this second sector. So we can see it coming up here where you can kind of see the hill starting to go up. And I would start attacking at this flag here. And you can see it turns yellow right there up to 7, 8, 9%. Stays up a little bit, levels off. It'll be level for just a short period of time before it starts to descend a little bit, and you can really use it as a launch pad, like I said. And there you go. There's the launch pad done and dusted. You saw my speed jump up to 47 kilometers per hour there. You can really use that to gain some separation on the field. Now the rest of this middle section can be kind of boring, as it is pretty flat, which makes it a good point to discuss bike selection. We'll start with bike selection for the, say, short power riders, where you're going to be attacking for the short, punchy climbs. You're probably going to be trying to get the sprint points. And so for that, I would go with as aero a frame as you can get. And then a good mixed wheel set would be good there. Because the light wheel set will help you on the climbs, but you don't want to lose too much aerodynamics for your sprint or the flats on this course. This makes the Tron bike kind of ideal, but there are some other options like the Alley Sprint with the Arc die cuts or the Envies, or there is also the Trek Madone or Cervelo S5 with those same wheel sets. Here we're hitting the uncategorized climb in this sector. So you can see it started at about 7.2 kilometers, sorry, at about 7 kilometers into this course, and it will go for a fairly long time. Now, this is a good place for the heavier and long power riders or pure climbers to make some ground back up on the groups that have gotten away that are short power. Because it does climb for quite a while before leveling off. We should see it level off briefly up here. So there we go. It leveled off about 7.4 kilometers in. It levels off for about 300 meters before kicking back up, and overall this will climb about 1.2 kilometers in length before leveling out, coming into the third sector. And here we can see it kicking back up as you go through the traffic light. So this sector will end around 8.2 kilometers, and from here on out it is pan flat, straight to the end. It does have the sprint sections still to go, but we will get to those as they come up. So you can see on the left-hand side there, you get the warning for Broad Street Sprint coming up. It is fairly shortly after this climb, and if you look, you can see that this sprint is actually only 60 meters, and that the best time at the moment is 3.91 seconds. I am not a sprinter, so you will not see me beating that sprint time, unfortunately. But it is a good thing to point out that those warnings for when climbs are close or sprints are close can be really useful for timing your attacks and efforts, knowing that if you're going for a sprint points, but you aren't a sprinter, you may want to attack further away, and so attacking through that is a good idea. So you see that we've now leveled out. We're going through one turn, and then just at the end here, you'll see a left-hand turn, and as you come through that left-hand turn, you see the sprint banner for Broad Street, and it is 60 meters from there to the end of the sprint. This makes coming into that sprint through the corner really important to be the first wheel, because passing someone in the last 50 meters, if they are already sprinting, like that gentleman that you saw just pass me, is pretty difficult to do because they will sprint all the way to the line. Now after this, it is a fair distance to the next sprint point at around 12 kilometers. So you can get a pretty good rest in the 2 kilometers in between. I would say that if you're a long power rider and you found yourself in a group of short power riders for that sprint, here's a good place for you to attack them as you come through the sprint if you have enough in the tank after that climb. This is because the sprint riders will get up to a high speed, but that will use a lot of energy and a high anaerobic contribution. So by coming through them at a fast speed, using their speed to draft and pick up your own, they will need to produce another anaerobic effort to get back onto your wheel, and using the relatively common matches scenario, they're now burning one match for that sprint, and they're going to have to burn another match to get back onto your wheel, and every match you burn is a little less that you can do in the final. So personally, my preference is to attack in this section. As you see that number hit 3%, you get to a little bit of a false flat, and you can really drive the pace up on these false flats and kind of work your way through a war of attrition with the group that you're in. You can drop off a couple riders off the back this way. It is difficult and it tends to take a pretty prolonged effort though. So if you are planning on attacking for the next sprint, this is kind of unwise to follow, and I would instead try to stay in the group and conserve my energy if I was going to be going for those next sprint points. Now the next sprint should be up here shortly. As I said, it begins around 12 kilometers, so we still have another rough kilometer and a bit to go. Now this is a good point to talk about the other end of the spectrum with the long power riders. Those of you that are going for the attacks on the descents and the flats are going to want to go with as aero a bike as you can get. Again, because of the profile of the course, the Tron bike is the recommended bike. However, the Specialized Alley Sprint at lower levels, the Trek Madon, Cervelo S5, or S-Works Venge at higher levels work. At lower levels, your Zip 808s are going to be your best option. Otherwise, you can use the Arc die-cut wheels, aren't terrible. But at higher levels, I would suggest running the Super 9 disc and the 858 if you have it. The Zip 808s can work in a pinch. That's what I am using on mine because I do not yet have any of the disc wheels. And the reason for that is really because the aerodynamic benefit that you will have on the flats and the descents is you're not worried as much about the weight for the climbs where that would be a major factor. There is only a handful of minutes of actual high-intensity climbing on this course, so it's really up to you which one you're more comfortable with running. And after this sprint banner, then we will talk more about frame choice and what my personal use is and why. So you can see that sprint banner up there, we can see the counter on the side there, and we're in the sprint, about 12 to 12.1 kilometers in. It is a 300 meter, roughly, sprint, so it is pretty long. So it's worth it for the short power riders to kind of manage your effort. Let those people that are going to start sprinting as soon as they come over that sprint banner kind of go off a bit, and then you can use their wheels to surf through and stay in their draft before getting past them into the sprint at the final. This allows you to wait a little longer to use your sprint. Lionel Sanders used this quite well throughout the Zwift Pro Tri series. I would highly suggest going and looking at that and looking at some of his races and how he won some of his races by holding back on his sprint until he had seen several people already gone, and usually he started his sprints about 50 to 80 meters after everyone else, but won a good handful of those sprints, if not all of them. So returning to bike selection, bike selection can be pretty personal, but it should also depend on where you expect yourself to be in the race. So here I have the Trek Madon and the Zip 808s because I'm training by myself. I am doing a training ride, but my training ride for the day was to do some longer high intensity work, so I'm actually going after the fastest lap time on the course. Because I know how much of this course is flat and that I tend to do more time trial style efforts, I went with the most aero bike I could. If I was racing this, I would probably actually look to make my time on the climbs, in which case I would run with a lighter bike and wheels. I have done this race before going the regular direction with the Trek Amonda, which is one of the lightest climbing bikes in the game, and the Zip 808 wheels on it. And this is kind of to balance, take my aero from the wheels and take my weight gains from the frame. Really allowed me to just stay with that front group because I knew I wasn't going to be fast enough through the sprints to stay with them, but through the climbs I could stay with it by having the lighter frame, staying with them, and the 808s gave me enough of an aero benefit to be at least attached kind of all the way through the course. But kind of use what you want, use what you're comfortable with, know what you're going to be expecting of yourself from the races is a good way to go about it. So as we come through these turns, that is the first of the 2 turns that we had left until the end. There should be a right-hand turn up here, and that will bring us into the final line to the sprint. Now, the sprint, I would select a point on the sprint where you want to start sprinting. Kind of pay attention on this final section. Choose a landmark of some kind based on where your power lies. So if you are a pure time trial rider and you know you don't have any shot in the sprint, coming out of that last turn would actually be a really good point to start your final attack, because it's a pretty long way out. The sprinters likely won't be very encouraged to hold onto your wheel. You might get enough people to gap with you and bring a reduced bunch sprint to the end. If you are a shorter power rider, then obviously you're going to wait until you are closer to this sprint to start your attacks. Personally, on here, I would wait until the next time on the left-hand side you see a break in the buildings. So that's 200 meters away from the line. Tends to be a pretty good generic right here. This is a good generic place to start your sprint. Adjust it forward or back a couple hundred meters depending on how long you can sprint for. And I do believe I get out of the saddle here, doing 6.1 watts per kilo out of the saddle to try to get to the end as fast as I can, and I did take the fastest lap jersey, and my coach was very happy. So that is the Richmond Road World Championships reverse course route Recon, with a little bit about bike selection, a little bit about the different kinds of strategies you can use. I hope it was helpful for those that will be racing on the course. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to not miss the upcoming other recons or team time trial information videos, then go ahead and subscribe. If you have questions, comments, concerns, leave it in the comments section at the bottom.